Hello and welcome to the Simplify podcast. Today we'll be discussing whether improved financial education could narrow the advice gap. My name is Aneta Murza-Figiel and I will be co-hosting today's session along with Tasha Birchall, wealth consultant and Simplify. And we are joined here today by our fantastic panel, Kevin Pops, the partner and financial planner at Strategic Solutions and chairman of the PFS. Shannon Knight, head power planner at FPWM. Phyllis Alexander, associate professor in accounting and tax at Bournemouth University. And Paul London, a student money advice team leader at Bournemouth University. Welcome all. Before we start, Tasha, would you like to cover off what we're doing here at Simplify to cover and help within the education sector, please?
Yeah, so I guess what we've done this year is we've formed a bit of a connection, a relationship with a local secondary school. And this summer, what we did is participated in like a networking careers day with them. And really the purpose of that was just to raise awareness of financial services as a career. And we are looking to try and do that with other schools in the local area as well. And I suppose in terms of financial education, I think what we hope that doing that will gain is start prompting further questions from the students around kind of all stuff financial. And also, I guess the teachers too, to start saying, oh yeah, this is an area, this is a career. We probably need to start getting a little bit more into the schools in terms of financial education. So I guess that's kind of the footprint we've made so far within the education sector, and definitely an area we're looking to sort of stay involved in and progress further with.
Thank you, Tasha. It is well known now that more and more families around the world are suffering from the financial crisis. Managing money can have massive impact on lives of adults and young people, especially during the cost of living crisis. So, Kev, can I come to you first and ask what impact do you think the lack of financial education has today on both adults and young people living education? And do you think that contributes to the advice gap?
So yeah, I think it massively affects the advice gap. I think if people aren't aware of stuff, then they don't know what they're missing. So a bit like Donald Rumsfeld's unknown unknowns. If you don't know what's out there, you don't know what you're looking for. And it's really sad because a report done by BlackRock a few years ago said that money is actually the #1 cause of stress for families in the UK. So above even health or family or work related stuff, it's money. So that's shocking because it's actually something that can be changed. Not enough people do invest because they don't understand it. People who do invest are proven to be happier, more positive. But yeah, in the UK, only about 1/3 of people hold market-based investments. So the rest of the money is rotting away in cash because they don't know any better. Unfortunately, a lot of people say the hurdles that they have to get through to invest are lack of education, lack of knowledge in what they're investing in. Worried that they might lose all their money is another big reason, which again would, if they were educated better, they'd realise that's a very small chance of doing that if you're buying regulated investments. And the advice gap's got a huge part to play in that. I think that the survey also said that only 3% of the UK population saw a financial advisor, a regulated financial advisor in the last 12 months. So that's enormous. And it's because there aren't enough advisors around. So when I joined financial services 30 odd years ago, there's probably 1/3 of a million, and now it's about 27,000. So that, even somebody as poor at maths as me can work out that's less. And also it's a very ageing population as well. So it's predicted that a lot of those will go as well. So the situation at the moment is getting worse, not better. So we've got a real problem. So I think financial education could fill that gap. I think it's a disgrace that it's not part of the national curriculum. I think it's a disgrace that kids leave GCSEs without having done financial education. Should be a compulsory topic. It's something that affects us all. And the fact that my kids and loads of other kids leave school knowing how an Oxbow Lake is formed in the name of Henry VIII's wives, but they don't know the difference between a credit card and a debit card or what a checkbook is a national disgrace. So it's up to us, I think, as in industry and in professions to fill that gap, like we have to so many times for politicians, fill the gap for them, because they don't seem to have any appetite. And I could go on for about 8 hours now on a conspiracy theory about how it's handy for them that they don't teach young people about debt and interest and stuff when they make them take out a huge student loan. The second they walk out the door and they ask them to sign up for stuff, they have no idea what they're signing up for. So that could be a separate 3-hour podcast on my own, which nobody would ever listen to. So I'll leave that for another day. But I think it's an enormous subject, and it's really good that people like Simplify are trying to bring it to people's attention.
Thank you, Kev. That's very interesting. And actually, the results from the research undertaken by Santander Education Customer Support as well show that 68% of young people believe that the lack of education has contributed to them falling into debt. So that's very nicely supports the points that you have just made, Kev, as well. So Shannon, coming over to you, having left higher education not too long ago, what impacts have you seen for yourself and other students from lack of financial education?
So I graduated university 5 years ago, and whilst at university there were definitely 3 types of people. There were people who were amazing at budgeting, knew exactly how much they were allowed to spend per week and would never deviate from that plan. You'd get, on the polar opposite side, you'd have people who didn't have a clue about budgeting, would spend their student loans within the first couple of weeks, and then you'd kind of have the people in the middle who would kind of know about budgeting, would know how much money they'd have, but would kind of have their fingers crossed and make sure, well, try to make sure that they wouldn't overspend. And from my experience, when at university, there were so many people who landed themselves in debt. Like one of my old housemates, she ended up having like a black mark against her credit, everything like that, all because she didn't have this financial education and hadn't been told actually the implications of, if you borrow this money, yes, you have to repay it, but the interest rates and everything like that, it all just accumulates, and then people end up borrowing to repay this debt, and it kind of all spirals out of control. And one thing that I did notice was that the people who were getting into debt would spend less time, and they'd have less time on their studies because they'd be so focused on trying to repay this debt. They'd take on part-time jobs that would take up the majority of their time. It would just distract them. And realistically, we all go to university to get an education, but without having almost this financial stability, it does detract from the overall experience. The post university, I've had a few friends who've come up to me and said, you know what, I messed up when I was younger because I didn't have this financial education that I didn't understand. Now I'm trying to get a mortgage and I now can't get a mortgage because I have an awful credit rating. And I've actually lost track of the amount of times that people have said to me, I wish I was taught about tax and mortgages and how to save and almost what to look out for when it comes to financial products. Like, what does this interest rate mean? What even is inflation? Because, so for me, obviously, I take it for granted because I come from a financial background. My education has been in finance. But there are a lot of people out there who haven't had this education, and they are just completely baffled by all this terminology that they just don't understand. And another interesting thing, so I was talking to my younger sister at the weekend, who is 14, in prime financial education age of her life, where she should be being taught it. She's just started her GCSEs. And I asked her one simple question: have you had any financial education? And she just responded, what is that? I was like, well, have you been taught about budgeting? Or what it means to have money, and she said no. Like the only thing she's been taught is from our parents. And actually, if we're relying on adults teaching their children these valuable skills, then surely we should be providing the parents with the skills to be able to teach it. And actually, by making it a national curriculum, at least then we know that everyone will have the same broad knowledge, and people won't be disadvantaged if their parents have less knowledge about it. Because you do see absolute disasters where people, so one of my friends, she left school, got an apprenticeship, was doing really well, and she then ended up in some financial difficulty and her whole life spiraled. She ended up going into emergency accommodation and she ended up living on the breadline. She now goes to food banks and she cannot get out of this cycle because her life is just spiraled. And there is nothing out there to help people unless they're at catastrophe. So if they're at catastrophe, you can go to the Citizens Advice Bureau and be like, help. But there isn't anything for the people in between that want help but can't seem to source it.
And that's kind of mirrored as well in one of the other stats from Santander. It was said 44% of UK adults felt that they'd be better prepared in life had they received financial education. And this question, I'll come to you first, Shannon, but Phyllis, it'd be good to have your view as well. Do you think that the advice profession could play a more active role in financial education? And if so, how do you think they could do that?
So I think they could. I think being able to provide everyone with the basic level of education will help. I think the reason why people potentially shy away from it is the harshness of regulation within our industry. Like, we are regulated on absolutely everything, and say you give someone advice, you obviously then have to charge for it, and there's going to be a proportion of people out there who can't afford to pay for the financial advice, and it's kind of this vicious circle where if people need the financial advice, and people who have less money, you could argue, need the advice more because they have less resources. But if a financial advisor can't afford to pay the regulator because all they're doing is helping people who truly need the advice, it's kind of that vicious circle.
Thank you, Shannon. And I guess in the sort of the advice profession sort of helping the education sector, I guess, Phyllis, do you think that there's anything that could be done there?
Absolutely. In fact, what you're doing, at Simplify and reaching out to the local secondary schools, that's fantastic. The advice professionals can absolutely play a major role. I'm shocked by some of the things that you've just shared, Shannon, regarding your sister and whatnot. I know that, I understand that financial education is being slowly incorporated into the curriculum, or at least this is what is being reported, but it is patchy and it differs across nations, and not all schools actually adhere to the national curriculum. And not all teachers, I think quite importantly, feel comfortable talking about, specialist knowledge like personal taxation or finance. So I think we need to think, bigger and more inclusively, certainly. And I think that's where advice professionals can step in and get involved with the local schools, with the local community. And I understand what you're saying, Shannon, with regard to the regulation and whatnot. But this is really important because people's attitudes towards money are developed at a very young age, the research would show. And we're talking primary school age, not even GCSE, but primary school age. So we really do, have a need to do this. I think that advice professionals could perhaps, liaise with the schools and come in as guest speakers, or, in the classroom or the assemblies. They might be able to get involved with workshops with the teachers. I think there is a desire to embed this in the school systems, given the space, and I know that's a big given. But again, if the teachers aren't, confident in the subject matter, it's not going to be covered. So.
Thank you, Phyllis. That's very interesting. And just coming to you now, Paul. So what does financial education look like today in higher education? What are the key challenges you see, and what does good financial education look like to you?
Yeah, so I think it's important to say that across the higher education sector, so universities, I think it's quite varied what universities offer. Although most universities will offer some kind of core support for students, so which they have done for many years. So things like budgeting, money management, that's within the majority of universities, either through the university's own provision or through often through the student union services. So through student union advice services, they will offer that budgeting, money management skills. To give you a sort of example of something that's happening at Bournemouth University, so there's a new post within the Res Life service, which sits within our residential services department. So there's a new skills officer, and he will be working with students on money skills. So again, getting sort of first years talking about money and sort of doing checks with them to make sure that they are sort of aware of what, how they can sort of plan and make the most of their money that they're receiving from student finance, from parents, and potentially money from the university as well through bursaries and support funds. Universities also run campaigns. So we've got one coming up in November called Talk Money Week. So again, we're sort of getting out to students, talking about the relevant topics of the time. So obviously energy crisis, cost of living. So universities will sort of play on those themes throughout the year to try and sort of drum up interest from students, to try and get them talking. And then there's other topics which are relevant to students, which maybe aren't delivered as much as students may like. So we're hearing that students want to hear about investments. Obviously, Kevin talked about regulated investments. And obviously not every student is going to have free money to invest, but there are some that do want to know about that, to make the most of their money throughout their journey and beyond. But with that also comes other products which carry risk, which we see students getting into: crypto, NFTs, esports, which is high on our agenda to try and unpick, because it's ever moving. So it's always changing. So we're trying to keep on top of those kind of themes to try and deliver messages to students, to educate them on where the risks are, maybe more than actually what they can do to get into more regulated investment. So because we see students fall down those sort of pitfalls, we're trying to raise awareness of the risks, maybe rather than educate them on what's maybe safer. So there's certainly gaps there. And also other themes, just to mention, like gambling, or I think for us comes under that financial education, whatever they're spending their money on, it comes under that financial education umbrella. So if we can educate on, safe gambling, it's not about don't have fun, don't gamble. It's about safe gambling, staying safe with your money, same with scams and frauds, fraudulent activity, staying safe. And then there's, I suppose, those topics that are further out there, tax, pensions, mortgages, interest rates that have been mentioned. Those don't tend to be delivered to students, yet they're relevant, and certainly relevant as students progress through their student journey, going into final year and then out into obviously the big wide world. So there's gaps there that potentially could be plugged to educate students on those kind of elements as well. in terms of, I suppose, like obstacles or challenges, has already been mentioned, because there's no financial education prior to university, or very limited. We immediately see students come into their first year either with some level of debt possibly, or they're already in that cycle where they are spending money on things that they may not be able to afford as a student. So subscriptions, and mobile phone contracts, high contracts, and again, it's educating them before they get to university, so they're not then coming to university already in that cycle, and then trying to break that cycle, of course, is very, very difficult. And then the other challenge, I think, is around engagement. It's not the most funnest of topics. It's quite dry most of the time. If obviously we had someone like, I guess, Martin Lewis with us, then it might be a different story. But trying to get that engagement, getting people in to deliver, interesting, delivering it in an interesting way, then I think that's quite an obstacle as well, and that's been a challenge over the many years. Getting students engaged and bums on seats to then deliver all this information, because the information's out there. It's just getting it to the students. And I suppose in terms of what does good financial education look like, I suppose it's those things that I've mentioned, but again, accessibility, easy access for students. They can sort of access it as and when, in a sort of easy format, and I guess if that financial education happens early, it's got to be translated easily at a younger age, so as they come through, they then understand the terminology, because it is quite complex when you get into again, investments, tax, all of that. It's quite a complex thing, but if you've already had some of that education, then hopefully it should then lead into sort of more complex financial education.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. That's really interesting, actually, because when we went into the schools and we said, do you know much about financial services? Most of them just said, no, what's that? And the terminologies and whatnot they'd not heard of. So yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. Phyllis, what are the economic benefits of improved financial education?
Okay. Before I give you a shockingly big number, okay, let me first, set a little context here. So yes, financial illiteracy in the UK is an issue, and we've had this financial capabilities agenda since 2015. But this is a global issue, okay? And it has the attention of academics like myself, policymakers, governments across the world, the supranational organizations like the OECD, the UN, the World Bank, etc. Because financial literacy is fundamental to social inclusion, okay? And it's a key factor in, a number of the UN's social sustainability development goals. All right, so that said, let's bring it back in. So in the UK, there's been a number of reports that try to quantify the economic impact of better financial capability. One such report was commissioned at the beginning of this financial capabilities agenda, and that was performed by Europe Economic. This is an independent think tank. And they modeled the potential personal monetary gain of better financial education. And in their simulation, they quantified it to be over £100 billion over that year period. And that, again, that was scaled up to the entire UK adult population. This is 70% of that was for, better wealth, okay, improved wealth, and the remaining 30% was increased consumption. So we're looking at a macro economic impact here. And what the model didn't do, though, was simulate the corollary impact that better mental health would have. okay, as a result of better financial capability. And then the corollary impact on the productivity that also comes from better wealth management. So, I mean, it's massive. It's just massive. So that's one report. As I said, there are others, but yeah, I just thought I'd share that one with you.
Thank you. It's really interesting. Thanks, Phyllis. Okay, and Kev, I guess just to summarise and close off then, do you think improved financial education could narrow the advice gap?
100%, yes, I definitely think it could do. I think it's a huge task though, because to recruit a new younger, more diverse range of financial planners and advisors and paraplanners will take a long time, so it's not an overnight fix. I think you know, that'll be something that takes years and years, but that's no reason to not start today anyway to get that on the road. But also I think it's more than that. Financial education will, linking back to what Paul was saying, will stop people from falling victims of scams, which is some numbers in Phyllis's numbers that we'll never even know how many people just lose all their wealth, that hard-earned wealth, and the mental drain on them, and the effects that has of losing everything you've saved up for, particularly if you've not been lucky enough to be gifted money or come from wealthy families. If you've worked your life and then some horrible piece of filth on the internet steals it from you, the impact of that is enormous. So a bit of financial education would sidestep a lot of that. People would look at it and go, that cannot be true what that thing says, that link is not correct, I'm not going to give my bank details, all those things. Financial education would do that without actually necessarily narrowing the advice gap. So I think advice gap is one part of it, but the financial education thing goes way beyond that and just prevents people, and usually you'd say prevention is better than the cure. I would argue that that's always true unless you're the people that are flogging the cure and making money out of it, which is maybe going back to conspiracy theories, I don't know. But you know, the advice gap is going to get worse because there's more and more people would, you know, even I am quite young for a financial advisor, which is madness. But an Octopus report from a few years ago said there are over 2/3 of firms have nobody under the age of 30 in them, but 15,000 odd advisors want to retire by 2030. So this is a problem. So we've got to turn the ship round first and get it back to close this gap. But there's no reason not to educate people in the meantime whilst that's going on, if it just prevents them from making mistakes and stops them from thinking that cryptocurrency is an investment rather than a gamble. And it might be a brilliant gamble for some people, who knows, and understanding the impacts of gambling on their wealth and then also their well-being. So I think financial education is probably the biggest no-brainer that we've had for part of the curriculum forever, but it still doesn't seem to be happening. So it should be happening. The government should be providing it, but they should be providing lots of other things. I don't just mean politically this government, I mean all governments. They've all had an opportunity. And maybe, you know, topically, maybe the Chancellor could go to a bit of a financial education session too and understand what's going on there. Would be nice, wouldn't it? So I think financial education could narrow the advice gap. That's a long-term plan though, but you have to start, you know, small steps. I wish I could quote Nietzsche a bit better on that one, but you know, you cannot learn to fly. So we need to do it for many other reasons before we get to narrowing this gap. So I think it's so important, and like all the other speakers have mentioned, all the things they talked about, Shannon's you know, personal experiences of friends and family that have struggled, and what Phyllis is saying about the monetary side, and what Paul's reflections have been on, you know, trying to stop people from wasting their money on gambling, cryptocurrency bets. Whether that becomes a good money maker or not, who knows? But it is a gamble still. So I think there's so many things that financial education could do alongside eventually narrowing that advice gap, which is where we'd like to be. But that's a long-term project for us. So the answer is yes, but so much more than just narrowing the advice gap.
Thanks all. There's a huge amount of opportunities and points for consideration when it comes to financial education, that's for sure. We just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us here today and sharing your views on this very important topic. If anyone watching would like to get in touch or would like some more information, please contact us via LinkedIn or via our website at simplifyconsulting.co.uk. Thank you all and have a good day.